Have you ever had a woman say, "I just don't feel you," when you were right there in the same room? Have you ever laid beside someone you love and still felt alone? Have you ever been told you never open up, while thinking to yourself, "I give her everything, my time, my loyalty, my damn soul," and then one day she walks out, not screaming, not slamming doors, just fading like fog off the morning glass. And you stand there wondering, what did I do wrong? Or worse, what did I not do at all? I've been there. I've stared at the empty side of the bed and thought maybe I was too quiet, too serious, too me. But what if I told you something that no one told us growing up? What if your stillness isn't the problem, but the very thing she needed? If only you knew how to hold it right. Carl Jung once wrote, "Stillness is not absence, it's wholeness." But the world we grew up in didn't teach us that. They taught us to build, to provide, to endure, but not to be present. And the women we love, they don't leave because we weren't strong enough. They leave because we weren't reachable. Let me explain. You see, true stoicism, the kind that grounds you like an oak in the middle of a storm, is not about being stone-faced. It's about being anchored. Man who doesn't flinch when she cries, who doesn't shut down when she's lost, who holds the space even when he doesn't have the words. John Gottman, the relationship psychologist, calls it emotional attunement. Women don't need you to talk more. They need to feel you're with them, even in silence. But most men confuse silence with distance. We shut down because we don't want to mess it up. We stay quiet because we were taught that emotions are messy, and so we sit still, but not present. Cold, not calm. Detached, not grounded. And that's the difference. Stillness isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of depth. It's the unshaken clarity that says, I may not have all the answers, but I'm not going anywhere. And when a woman feels that, when she feels that, something in her softens, not because you fixed her, but because you didn't abandon her in the storm. That's what this story is about. Not how to win her back with words, but how to come back to the man who never needed them. So if you've ever been misunderstood for your silence, if you've ever been left, not for someone better, but someone more alive, stay with me. This isn't about becoming louder. It's about becoming clearer. And I'll show you how. Let me take you back to a man I knew. His name was Robert, a soldier, a husband, and the loneliest strong man I've ever known. His name was Robert, Vietnam vet, Union man. Built his own deck, changed his own oil, never missed a single mortgage payment. In 27 years, the kind of man you call when your roof leaks at 2 a.m., the kind of man you don't worry about because he always has it handled. He married young, had 2 kids, never raised his voice, never laid a hand, never looked at another woman. If you ask his friends, they'd say, solid guy, rock, reliable. And yet, one afternoon after dinner, after the dishes, his wife of nearly 3 decades stood at the kitchen sink and said, I don't feel seen. Robert didn't understand. Seen? What do you mean, seen? I'm right here. But she wasn't talking about his body. She meant something deeper. She meant his presence, his emotional availability, his ability to sit with her, not just beside her. And that night, she didn't yell, didn't cry. She just packed a small bag, kissed him on the cheek, and said, You're a good man, Robert, but I've been alone in this marriage for years. That broke him, because in his mind he did everything right. He worked, he stayed faithful, he protected, he provided. He showed love the only way he knew how, through sacrifice. But you see, no one ever told Robert that providing is not the same as connecting, that reliability is not intimacy, that being a rock is noble, but even rocks cast shadows. John Gottman would call what happened to Robert emotional disconnection. It's not betrayal. It's not abuse. It's the slow erosion of presence, the missing eye contact, the silence during dinner, the repeated I'm fine when she asks, what's wrong? And Carl Jung, he might say Robert lived too long in his persona, the mask we wear to meet the expectations of the world, the loyal husband, the tough father, the responsible man, but behind that mask was a man who never met his own anima, his emotional, receptive, vulnerable self. He didn't ignore her because he didn't love her. He ignored her because he ignored himself. He mistook stoicism for avoidance. He thought being unreadable made him strong, but for her unreadable meant unreachable, and in time that quiet became unbearable. I sat with Robert after the divorce. He didn't cry, but he said something I'll never forget. She left me, and I don't even know what she needed from me. And that's the tragedy, isn't it? Not the loss, but the confusion, the shock of realizing that being good is not the same as being emotionally present. Robert was never the villain in his marriage. He was just never fully there. And I share this story not to shame men like Robert. Share it because I was Robert too, and maybe, just maybe, you've been him too. So what makes a man emotionally present without becoming overly reactive or dramatic? What does real stoic masculinity look like? Let's go deeper. After Robert's story, I couldn't sleep, not because it was rare, but because it was familiar, too familiar. It reminded me of how many men I know, good men, loyal men, solid as steel men, are slowly being left. Not for being bad, but for being emotionally absent. And here's where the misunderstanding lies. We think presence means showing up physically, being there for dinner, fixing the faucet, paying the bills. But to her, presence is something else entirely. It's not about what you do, it's about how deeply you exist in the moment with her. John Gottman, one of the leading researchers on marriage, calls it emotional attunement, and he warns of something he calls stonewalling, when a man shuts down emotionally, becomes distant, silent, unreadable, and women. They feel it, not with their minds, but with their nervous systems. Gottman studied thousands of couples, and the #1 predictor of divorce in men, not yelling, not cheating, it was stonewalling. That moment when you cross your arms, look away, and say, I don't want to talk about it. It's not the silence that breaks them. It's the feeling of being alone inside a relationship. They begin to feel like they're screaming into a cave, and all they hear back is the sound of their own echo. Now some of you might be thinking, but I'm not stonewalling, I'm just calm, I don't want to argue. And I hear you. There's a big difference between reacting wildly and staying grounded. But here's the nuance. True stoicism isn't avoidance, it's presence without panic, stillness with awareness, silence with depth, and no one articulated. This better than Carl Jung. He believed that when a man suppresses all feeling, he doesn't become more masculine. He becomes fragmented. He lives only in the persona, the mask he presents to society, the provider, the strong one, the unshakable wall. But beneath that persona lies a world he has never dared to meet, his fear, his sadness, his tenderness. Jung called this hidden world the shadow, and here's the twist. When a man rejects his shadow, he becomes cold, mechanical, emotionally unreachable. But when he faces it, when he integrates the parts of himself he once feared, he becomes whole. And that wholeness is what women over 50 are instinctively drawn to. Why? Because by that age they've been through their own storms. They're not looking for a hero. They're looking for presence, for stillness that doesn't suppress, but contains. I once sat with a woman, 58 years old, divorced after 32 years. She said, I didn't need my husband to cry with me. I just needed him to sit there while I cried, to look me in the eye and let me fall apart without flinching. You know what she meant? She was asking for the kind of man who doesn't fear emotion, not because he's numb to it, but because he's familiar with it, in himself. That's what Jung meant when he said, a man becomes whole when he no longer fears the unknown within himself. And that's the man who becomes magnetic, not because he tries to attract, but because his energy says, you can fall apart next to me. I won't run. You can be messy. I won't fix you. You can bring your chaos. And I'll remain calm. Women sense this, especially after 50, because by then, they don't care how much money you make or how witty your jokes are. They care how your presence feels when life breaks their heart. So here's the truth. Stillness is only powerful when it's conscious, when it's the result of deep inner work, when it's not a cover for fear but a container for love. And once you've reached that place, you'll stop being left, because now you're not just there, you're with her. So what does it look like when a man stops reacting and starts holding space? Let me show you what happened to me the night I stopped fixing and finally started connecting. It happened on a Tuesday night. Nothing dramatic, no big fight, just one of those long, grey evenings that feel heavier than they should. She was quiet, my partner, not angry, not sad, just folded into herself. You know that look women get when they're holding something but can't find the words? She had that. Old me. I would have started asking, what's wrong? I'd offer suggestions, solutions, a plan to fix whatever it was. Because that's what we do, right? We fix. But that night, I remembered Robert. I remembered what silence can cost, and I remembered what Jung said. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. So I sat down across from her, not as the fixer, not as the problem solver, just as a man, still calm, completely with her. I didn't reach for her hand. I didn't interrupt her silence. I just stayed. And eventually her eyes found mine, soft, unsteady, like someone who wasn't used to being held emotionally. She whispered, I don't know what I'm feeling, and instead of giving her a label, I nodded and said, you don't have to explain it. I'm not going anywhere. I didn't realize how powerful that sentence was until her shoulders dropped, until she exhaled like she had been holding her breath for years. That night, I learned something no book ever taught me. Being present is more healing than being right, and sometimes the most masculine thing a man can. Joe is not flinch when a woman unravels in front of him, because if you stay, not to control, not to repair, but to witness, then something sacred opens up. She begins to trust the silence between you, not as absence, but as safe space. And in that space, she doesn't need answers. She just needs to be seen. I realized something else that night. I wasn't just doing this for her. I was doing it for me, for the part of me that never felt safe enough to feel anything as a boy, for the part that learned to be useful, strong, respected, but never emotionally known. And when I stopped trying to fix her, I started healing myself. That's the paradox, isn't it? The more I tried to control love, the more it slipped away. But when I simply stayed, still, grounded, honest, love stayed too. Because women don't fall for perfection, they fall for presence. And presence doesn't come from knowing what to say. It comes from knowing how to stay. That was the night I stopped chasing approval and started embodying peace. But it wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the moment I realized stillness isn't passive, it's powerful. And for the right woman, it's irresistible. There's a moment in every man's life, quiet, slow, unannounced, when you realize she didn't leave because you weren't enough. She left because you weren't really there, not emotionally, not soulfully, not fully awake. Carl Jung said, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. And I think that's what happened to me. I had spent years looking outward, trying to earn her affection with hard work, trying to deserve her with silence and stability, trying to keep her by fixing her pain. But I never once paused to look inward, to ask, am I showing up or am I just performing a role? You see, the modern man is praised for what he builds, his wealth, his home, his career, but no one teaches him how to build a space where love can rest. No one teaches him how to be still and yet fully present. No one teaches him that there is more strength in holding space than holding control, until it's too late, until she's gone, until you're staring at the coffee mug she left behind, wondering why it still hurts. But here's the truth that set me free. Presence is not about being impressive, it's about being integrated. It means you've met your shadow, you've sat with your fears, you've looked into the places you once avoided, and now you carry your silence not as armor, but as peace. That's the kind of man women over 50 are drawn to. Not the one who promises answers, but the one who can sit in not knowing without collapsing. She doesn't need you to be perfect. She needs to feel like you're there, even when you have no solution, even when she's unraveling, even when love feels fragile, and when she senses that your stillness is not withdrawal, but wholeness. She'll stop testing you, she'll stop running, because she finally feels received. That's what Jung meant by individuation, becoming whole. Not through noise, not through effort, but through the quiet marriage of your light and your darkness. And I'll be honest, this awakening didn't happen overnight. It came through loss, through silence, through staring at a life I thought I built right, only to find out I never truly lived it with someone. I only performed it for someone. But once I saw it, once I stopped trying to be the man I thought she wanted and just became the man I truly was, everything shifted. I stopped chasing, stopped performing, and somehow love stayed. Because when you carry stillness not as a wall, but as a welcome, you don't have to win her over. She finds herself drawn to you, because you've finally come home to yourself. So if any part of this resonated, if you've ever lost love not through betrayal, but through emotional distance, I invite you to stay for just one more minute. There's one thing I want to ask you to do. If you've ever loved quietly, if you've ever stayed loyal, worked hard, stayed steady, and still watched her walk away without truly understanding why, you're not alone. There are thousands of men just like you who were never taught how to be felt, only how to be useful. Men who carry their pain in silence because somewhere along the way, someone told them that real men don't need to be understood, just respected. But that's not the full story. What if your silence wasn't weakness, but an unread language? What if the stillness inside you wasn't emptiness, but depth, waiting to be shared? If this message touched something inside you, even just a little, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and write, "Stillness is my strength now." And if someone comes to mind, a friend, a brother, a man you know who's been through this kind of silence, send this to him. Because sometimes just knowing we're not alone is the first step to healing. This channel isn't just about advice, it's about connection, a place where strong men are allowed to feel and still be strong. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. Not your past, not your questions, not your quiet pain. Welcome to Smart Advice 50. We see you and we're listening.